Hi, everyone, and welcome to the third week, second lecture of technical writing. This one's called Spatial Orientations. Now, the phrase spatial orientations comes from literature on the teaching of technical writing. So, the kind of big word for teaching strategies that you'll see in this lecture is the word pedagogy. And if you're in education or have taken any education courses, you probably know this word very well. But basically, the articles that I'll cover in this lecture and the next lecture are written for people like me who are going to teach technical writing. They're not really typically geared toward students of technical writing unless you're doing some research. Now, like I said, we don't have time for a big research project in this shortened course format. But this lecture and the next have what I consider to be pretty fun assignments actually within technical writing. But they're a lot of fun to do. I'm going to ask you to spend a lot more time in the discussions on reflecting on these assignments. So, uh, in my opinion, like I said, they're a little more fun to do, I think, than most assignments. But that's not to say that they aren't tackling really important, not only technical communication concepts, but also just cultural concepts that should inform kind of how we live every day. So let me share my lecture first. Um, and yeah, what I'll do here is uh, I'll start to show you how this article reads, and then I'll show you some student samples, and then we'll get into some online examples like I've done before. Um, but here we go. So this is Spatial Orientations, Cultivating Critical Spatial Perspectives in Technical Communication Pedagogy by Elise Verzosa Hurley, who I believe is at Illinois State University. And so the beginning of this article talks about her move there. She writes, having only visited the Midwest once before during my whirlwind campus visit, my entire spatial orientation changed. And so I think what she means here is, coming to a place she's never been, she has to rethink how she interacts with just everyday space. Maybe you've had this before when you first moved to college. Maybe in high school, you had a coffee shop or you had your room at home where you really liked to do your work and you got a lot done. But then when you came to college, you found out, oh no, I have to find a new coffee shop. I have to find new routes to get to class, new kind of everything with the space. And so that's what Hurley's talking about here is that sense of kind of belonging or that sense of like being in a space with a purpose is your spatial orientation. And she does think on the big scale as well, right? She's not only thinking about campus, but she says the whole Midwest. And so, maybe if you think about your hometown and you kind of always know which way is the way home or which way is north, which way is east, that kind of thing. She's saying, hey, in my new move, I was very unsettled from those things. And so that's how she introduces this chapter. So she says, I begin this chapter on integrating spatial perspectives in technical communication pedagogy with this narrative in order to underscore the ways in which the working of our everyday lives, whether personal or professional, are comprised of numerous and overlapping spatial stories. And so, again, I really wanted to pull this quote out because she's working in that same space that we're working on in this course. We're not thinking of technical writing solely as scientific reports, overly technical details. We're thinking about technical writing in everyday kind of ways, whether they are professional or personal. And she kind of completes this introductory section by saying the spatial turn in the disciplines of technical communication and rhetoric and writing studies has gained significant traction in recent years, all of which affirm that where communicative practices happen is just as important as how and why they happen. And so, just to kind of talk about our own vocabulary a little bit more, we talked about the social justice turn last. Now we learned, hey, there's also this spatial turn in technical writing. So people have all kinds of different ways of looking at it. And then we get three really important terms here, right? We affirm that where communicative practices happen is just as important as how and why they happen. So again, if we're thinking about what I brought up earlier, that idea of like moving somewhere new, maybe moving to campus for the first time, maybe this is just as important to you as how you're going to approach an assignment and why you're approaching it in a particular way. In fact, in this online session, maybe you are back at home and you're finding that you have a kind of different relationship to the how and why of your college work than you do when you're at your dorm or here on campus. And so the beginning of this chapter is just to get us started thinking about those kinds of things. How does our relationship to our space affect the ways that we communicate, not only by virtue of, hey, we're communicating for a different place, but how and why are we writing is affected by where we are. And so to go like one metaphoric step further, Hurley does give us some examples to think about in terms of technical writing, and I think I added some as well. But here are some ways you can think about technical writing also in a spatial way. You can think about writing as having trenches, frontiers, landscapes, cities, contact zones, borderlands. Writing as having its own architecture. We think about the margins, like I said, in the social justice turn, but they're also a physical space, right? There's margins on a page. And when we talk about online stuff, we talk about sites, right? Like an FAQ page is always on a web site. And so we have a whole of these very like spatial ways of talking about technical writing already. And here's just an old example of somebody who tackled the tailor the syllabus project that we did together. And I think this student's submission really highlights all those kind of spatial ways you can talk about writing, right? Like each section is not only a section with a heading, it's kind of this full site with its own border or boundary. And we have these kind of trenches or extended borders between things to kind of show us that things are important, but important differently in various ways. And then we even have information here, right? Like this one didn't get its own site. It's kind of pushed to the margin. And we can ask, why was that pushed to the margin, or why were the trenches organized in this way? So why am I telling you that? Just to take a quick pause here. If we think about some of those discussion posts I've been talking about when you're responding to your colleagues, and I've said, make sure to borrow some of the vocabulary from the lectures because that's what we want to see. Well, here's a whole other set of vocab words that we can use to describe other people's technical writing. Like, why did they settle on a particular architecture? Why are the frontiers or the landscapes between information so big or so small? What are the contact zones between different sections, and how do you describe things? So again, these are more metaphoric and don't have like a precise definition, I don't think, in technical communication, other than sites, margins, architecture. Maybe these do have a more concrete definition. But borderlands, contact zones, landscapes, these are all still very metaphorical. So I fill you in on this kind of information. Again, not just because I think it's really interesting, and I do think it's interesting, but because I'd like to see you start to try to kind of experiment or practice with these terms in our discussion posts. So start to think about it, and keep this one in mind maybe as an example. So here's a little bit more that Hurley writes about spatial orientations. She says that cultural geographers and spatial theorists have made apparent that understanding the spatiality of everyday life is integral to understanding how the spaces and places we inhabit always already produce and are produced by social, cultural, ideological, and rhetorical meanings. So I'm not sure if any of you have ever heard the phrase critical theory. Usually you can put a lot of words in between there: critical social theory, critical cultural theory, critical race theory, and so on. But all of these critical theories, and they're all kind of commented on or included here. Really, what they're about is asking the question: how does a social thing affect not only how I communicate, but also who I'm communicating to and why I'm communicating? And it's the same thing for cultural theory or ideological theory. It's saying, let's start with culture instead of maybe a text or some example. Let's start at culture and think about how and why that's affecting how people behave and communicate. And not only that, but also shaping how they themselves end up communicating and continuing the culture or the social practices. So that's really always what that critical theory frame implies. And what Hurley is saying is, space is one of those things. We should start looking at space and thinking about how does that affect how and why I communicate? How does that affect how and why I receive a message in a particular way? Because remember, we're always breaking down in this course. On one hand, we're producers of technical writing, and on the other hand, we're consumers. And so, how does the space that we inhabit or the space that we share affect that? So before I get to, I'll give you the study that Hurley conducted and then the outcomes. But before we get there, I wanted to share just a couple artifacts I found online that maybe these can affect kind of how you're thinking about this concept. So you might recognize this space. This is the University of Delaware. It might look a little bit different to you because the date of this map I found is 1999. So we're looking a little bit into the past. But what I wanted to show you is how something like a space or a place not only can change over time, but can also affect the way we view an institution, the way we view how the institution behaves and how it communicates and so on. So if we zoom in already and you're familiar with campus, you notice one big thing is already totally out of place, right? The space in front of Memorial Hall and kind of behind it also is labeled as the mall, not the green. And so even on like a very cursory level, when we first look at it, you almost feel like the green says something ecological and focused on preserving spaces. But only about 30 years ago, it was called something different. And maybe you can think about how calling it the mall would make you feel a lot different about the green than what we call it today. Another thing that might stick out if you're on this part of campus a lot is in place of where Mentor's Circle is now, we have, I think the Honor Center's over here, but there's nothing really labeled there. It looks like it's just maybe a parking lot or a piece of concrete. And then we'll scroll out, and this is kind of a big one. There's no Star Campus, right? This is just the train station. And so when we think about this map of University of Delaware, we already start to see how ideology is kind of communicated through spaces. As we know now, Mentor Circle has the names of some of the best university mentors and professors all circled around a really big book to show how much the institution really appreciates those who go above and beyond in mentoring. We have a STAR campus, which stands for Science, Technology, and Advanced Research. And so those spaces tell us something, right? Like without one, how do we show that we really value science, technology, and advanced research? Without Mentors Circle, how do we demonstrate that we really appreciate our mentors and really appreciate the people who go above and beyond for students? And when we call it the mall versus the green, how does that change our whole kind of perspective on campus? So there you go. That's kind of an old map. Here's a new one. And right away, right, you see Mentors Circle and hey, this must be an institution where that's really valued. You scroll in a little bit and you see it's called the green, no longer labeled as the mall. And then you scroll out one more, you can see we have our Science, Technology, and Advanced Research campus. So again, that's just to show you that like, hey, the way a space changes and the way a space develops, that can show us a lot about an institution and kind of what its assumptions are. Curiously, I was experimenting with everything. If you go down to Mentor's Circle on your street view, so this is Memorial, and this would be the way to Mentor's Circle. Google Maps, their mapping is only up to 2008, so we don't even have the big book. And I tell you that for an important reason. I'll return to it in just a second. But I show you that because some landmarks like that really affect our emotional attachment to a space or a place. So maybe in the past you've told somebody to meet you by the books, or maybe you've met somebody there that's special to you, or maybe the book has just been the location of a hilarious prank you saw, which I have definitely never seen. But yeah, the book, its presence there gives you a kind of sense of place. And so when you see that picture, or at least when I see it, and it's not there, yeah, you start to have a different feeling relative to that space you've always inhabited, and that can kind of change the way you think. So those are just some examples I wanted to show you of our shared space and how it changes and how our relationship to it can change, and maybe maybe that does trickle down to our studies and our workplace. It feels like a place that values different kinds of things without those names and places, and so how does that affect how we communicate and how we receive messages within it? Of course, Hurley's thinking bigger, like I said, in terms of like whole regions, but she does talk about her campus too. So that's kind of the example I wanted to give you to help you start thinking through it. So the rest of her study, just to kind of give it a nice full overview, is that she did a graduate seminar project for teaching a graduate technical writing course. And she says on the first day of class, I asked students to introduce themselves to one another through a mapping activity. Using Google Maps, I asked students to plot the spaces, places, and pathways they inhabit by prompting them to consider personally significant physical and conceptual spaces and places you inhabit regularly, spaces and places you rarely frequent and or avoid, commonly traveled routes, and landmarks or monuments, literal or otherwise, that are important to you that help you to locate yourself. So again, I was just talking about the book for Mentor Circle, and how that kind of yeah, when it's gone, it's hard to locate yourself again. We don't have time for a full graduate seminar project because first, we're an undergraduate course, and second, we don't have a full semester that you really could sink your teeth into this kinds of things. But I am going to ask you to do a commonly traveled routes communication project, and hopefully we'll have some of the same outcomes. And so here are some things you can think about as you reflect on the assignment on Canvas, whether it's for your own submission or for your colleagues. But some of the outcomes that Hurley noticed was that they established from the outset of the course that even seemingly straightforward, neutral, and objective technical documents such as maps are always partial, contingent, and culturally situated and open to multiple interpretations and understandings. So again, you see our themes from the course, right? Especially from the last lecture. Nothing's really straightforward and neutral and objective. Sometimes, actually, let's say most of the time or all of the time, there shouldn't be a sense of like normal or regular. There's just different kinds of audiences who need to receive different kinds of information. And so that's the first part. The second part, that they're always partial, contingent, culturally situated, and open to multiple interpretations and understandings. You saw me kind of give an example with the campus map of how different locations and places being there or not being there can change your interpretation and understanding. So keep that in the back of your head as you do this assignment online. Secondly, the project allowed students to consider the connections among the spaces and places they inhabit, as well as to those they don't, and prompted them to reflect on the ways in which their relationships to spaces and places intersect with their own embodied experiences. And with social practices, they're influenced by cultural and ideological beliefs, which are then mediated through an array of technologies and texts. So there's quite a lot there. But as you do your assignment, yeah, think about how are you connected to your spaces and places? Is it usually mediated through technology or texts? I mentioned texting someone to meet you somewhere or using a technology like Google Maps. How do these kind of fill in how we think about spaces and really lean into in your reflections those cultural, ideological, or social kinds of ways that I highlighted earlier as central to the article. And lastly, their maps, meaning the students in her course, served as concrete references to spaces and places which with they had some working familiarity. They were useful in helping them grapple with highly theoretical spatial concepts we engaged in our readings and discussions. So hopefully, as you go through your assignments and create your own pieces of technical writing, it'll give you a really deep way to to engage with the spatial embodied parts of writing and really of life that maybe we don't sit back and critique often enough. But anyway, like I said, I'll put it into a shortened assignment for you to think about how you travel places familiar to you and how you might direct others in doing so. But yeah, in those discussions and in those reflections, including the weekly one, feel free to take a step back and think about, socially, why do I have to inhabit this space? Culturally, what are the expectations in this space? These are the kinds of deep questions that Hurley is asking, and kind of at the end of the day, she's telling all of us who teach technical writing, hey, maybe your students should be thinking about these things too. So that's the lecture. I have one more for you this week, and yeah, thanks as always for listening. And yeah, thanks. Bye.